Many years ago, I stayed at a hotel while attending a convention in Dallas. It has a penthouse suite that has hosted Elvis Presley, John Lennon, and many other famous guests. At the time I stayed there, the penthouse stood empty because it was undergoing renovations. Late one night, I befriended a security guard who invited me along with one of my co-workers to tour the penthouse. He explained that one of the rooms contained a hidden door that led to an elevator. Apparently, one of the previous owners had installed it, so he could easily access a room on a different floor where his mistress stayed. The guard informed us that one of the ladies had fallen to her death in the same elevator shaft. He said employees could sometimes still hear the creaking sound of elevator even though it was no longer in use. My friend and I separated. As we were wandering through all of the rooms on the penthouse level, we both had cameras with us and took a lot of photos. At one point, I wandered down a narrow hallway that appeared to be a servant's prep area of some sort, which led to the kitchen. The lights were not functioning at that time, and it was after midnight, so it was difficult to make out all of the details. Once I was a few steps into the space, I immediately felt cold and my instincts told me to turn around, and I did. I continued exploring the rest of the space and eventually met with my friend on one of the balconies. We chatted with the security guard for a few moments and thanked him, then left. It wasn't until the next day, when we were driving home from the convention, that we started discussing the details of the penthouse. I asked if she had noticed the dark hallway that led to the kitchen, and she said yes. I told her I had started to walk down the hallway but stopped myself because it felt cold and creepy, even evil. She was nodding her head in agreement and started excitedly telling me how she had started walking into the same space and had been overcome with the same feeling of pure evil. She described it as a very tangible physical sensation and said she immediately turned around and left the space. We were both fascinated that we had felt almost the same exact feelings in the same exact area, yet neither of us mentioned it to the other until almost a full day later. It's still one of the craziest experiences I had in a hotel. Interestingly, I found out that the hotel is known to be haunted when I did some digging on Google. Apparently, I'm not the only one who has had a creepy experience there. The air that hung around me was cool, but by no means fresh. It clung to me in the dark, thick with stories, none of which ended happily. A friend and I were taking a ghost tour of Edinburgh's underground vaults below Southbridge. Then these ancient rooms had been used by tradesmen for storage, but all manner of creepy stories surrounded them. Some say serial killers used them to hide bodies. Others say blight victims were left here to meet their bitter end. Much of the tour was designed for tourists, including a member of the staff jumping out to scare us. Our guide also told us that many guests have odd experiences in the days following the tour. He told us that car radios started out of the blue and household items mysteriously moved around. I passed this off as just another tall tale of tourists, although not not for long. My friend and I returned to her apartment and went to bed. Something must have disturbed me because I found myself awake in the middle of the night. I was groggy, but something was not right. The door was moving. It swung from fully open to closed, creaking as it did so. But there was a reasonable explanation. I knew if I could just think of it fast enough. My friend had probably gone to the bathroom and pulled the door closed behind her. I mustered up the courage to roll over, praying to see an empty side to the bed. But no, she was fast asleep beside me. And I lay there shivering, where there was no explanation for what I just experienced. The next morning, I felt unsettled and flicked through my photos from the tour. And there I stopped on one of that I had taken in almost complete darkness down in the vaults. Two bright neon lights, scratches like fingernails, ran across the screen, despite the fact that there had been no lights in the room where it was taken. I decided to email it to the tour company to see what they would say. And the manager replied, they saw many unexplained photos like this, and did I mind if they kept it for their database? I didn't mind, I told him, but secretly my mind was running into overdrive. What on earth had I witnessed in Edinburgh? When I was growing up, my family owned a cabin in the woods. It was mainly used for hunting, but we also drive up there to hike, make campfires, and just be in nature. This cabin was small. It was actually a trailer that was fixed into the ground. Because of this, my cousin and I would share a big bed in the main part of the trailer, and my dad would sleep on the couch, but we were all virtually in the same room. One night, when I was about 10, I woke up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I saw a man standing at the end of the bed, staring at me. I knew instantly that he was a ghost, as he was translucent and was dressed like he was from the mid-18th century. Quickly I threw the cover over my head and squeezed next to my cousin. I was terrified. I must have passed out, because the next thing I knew I was on the floor of the trailer, next to the couch. I could hear my dad snoring loudly, but every time I tried to reach out to wake him up, something would grab my hand and pull it back. The next morning, I woke up on the floor of the trailer, with my hands over my head. I woke up even weirdly positioned the following night, when my cousin and I awoke with the bed covered in vomit. It was from me, but I had no recollection of throwing it up, and I had never thrown up in my sleep before. But wait, that's where things get even more creepy. Because the next 2 times I went to the cabin, I ended up waking up covered in my own vomit, with barely any recollection of throwing up. This is something that had never happened to me before, but yet it was happening constantly at the cabin. Eventually, we sold the cabin. 2 years later, I was told that a family member once claimed to see a UFO. Yes, UFO. Landing in the yard when he got up to use the toilet at 3 a.m. night. Even now, over 20 years after the incident, I still remember it vividly, and I firmly believe that that cabin was possessed by something inhuman. We love heading out a hiking and camping trip to the beautiful mountains to enjoy the tropical nature and to escape from daily life. And this time we headed to a mountain with a gorgeous panorama view and an abandoned restaurant. When pitching our tent, we put it on the old restaurant structure to protect us from the rain. When going to sleep, we left our tent door half open to benefit from some additional ventilation. During the night, we heard many strange sounds as if someone was stepping on the timber planks outside. Of course, there was no one except a big frog with big red eyes, looking in the direction of the tent. To complete this spooky atmosphere, an old light bulb outside the restaurant was randomly turning on and off, even though there was actually no electricity. To feel a bit safer and to protect us from the strong winds, I asked my friend if we should close our tent door. He said yes, and just seconds later, the tent door was blown up by the wind and literally closed itself. We had a fateful sleep out there, to say the least. The next morning, when we were packing up our stuff, an old man came up the mountain on his horse and asked if we had a good night. Sure, except for those noises, animals and steps and the creepy wind. Everything was fine. At least the view from the mountain was worth it. So, if you like to explore this beautiful place during your holidays, maybe you should come during the day, but never in the night. Deep in the countryside of Ireland is a rather haunted castle known as Leap Castle. However, this castle carries a rather unwelcome tag. It's Ireland's most haunted castle and ranks as one of the world's most haunted too. It doesn't appear like a tourist attraction, and even as I approached it, I imagined it was not. A caretaker-like character invited me in to visit. I think that was not an official caretaker. That was a local man from some nearest village, and that man who calls this castle as his home. As he said, he lives in that castle along with 50 ghosts, and told me about the bloody chapel on the top floor. He then invited me to tour the upper levels of the castle alone. Armed with a torch. I climbed the dark spiral stairs to the room. The dark room was a shell and open to the elements. It would come as no surprise to anyone that this was a place where something terrible had happened. It was tangible in the air. Yet, that wasn't what lingers in the mind from my visit. As I returned down the stairs, that guide and I struck up another conversation. Mid-sentence, a noise from the dark like voice interrupted us. We both glanced in its direction, but there was nothing. Nothing. And I turned nervously back to my host. Instead of giving an explanation, he continued with his story, without even a mention of what happened, like a man who was used to strange sounds in the castle. And I also never asked what it was. But I often do wonder, what was that noise I heard in the shadows of that infamous castle?